He fired me for not smiling enough. 3 weeks later, his company had no clients left. My husband fired me for not smiling enough. 3 weeks later, I had taken every client from his company and he was begging me for a job. But this is just the beginning of how everything fell apart. The boardroom was packed with our most important clients, the ones worth millions. I stood at the front, presenting the campaign I'd spent 3 weeks creating, staying awake until 3 in the morning every single night. My voice was steady as I walked them through the strategy. The clients were leaning forward, completely engaged. I could see it in their eyes. They understood the brilliance of this approach. Then my husband David interrupted me mid-sentence. "Rachel," he said loudly with a cold smile directed at the clients, "maybe if you smiled more, they'd actually like what you're saying." Laughter rippled across the table. Awkward laughter. Uncomfortable laughter. The clients exchanged confused glances. My face burned so intensely I thought my skin might melt off. I'd given everything to this company, to him, and this was my reward. Public execution in front of the people whose respect I'd worked years to earn. David had already started talking over me, steering the meeting toward himself. I tried to continue speaking, but he waved his hand dismissively. 30 minutes later, he called me into his private office. His face was cold and calculated. I didn't recognize the man I'd married. "Rachel," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a child, "I think you're too serious for client-facing work. We're letting you go, effective immediately. Don't bother with severance." The words felt like a physical punch. My own husband, the man I'd sacrificed everything for. "You can't be serious," I whispered. He didn't even look at me. "Security will escort you out." I stood there for what felt like forever, then grabbed my old notebook and walked out without another word. As the elevator doors closed, I caught the eye of one of the clients. He looked at me with something I'd never seen before directed at David, pure, undeniable fury. 3 years earlier, we were newlyweds working from a cramped apartment that always smelled like instant ramen and desperation. David would pitch clients from our tiny living room while I worked from the kitchen table, handling strategy, creating proposals, managing finances. We had nothing except each other and massive dreams. I remember David holding my face in his hands at 3 in the morning while I was sobbing from exhaustion. "When this takes off," he promised, kissing away my tears, "you'll never have to worry again. We're building an empire together. You and me. I couldn't do this without you." He pulled out a ring, a beautiful vintage band he'd saved for months. "Marry me, Rachel. Build this with me forever." I said yes before he even finished the question. I thought I'd found my person, my forever, my dream. That night, we made love on our apartment floor surrounded by client proposals. I believed with absolute certainty that we were creating something sacred together. The business exploded within 6 months. Our first major client loved our work, so much they referred us to 3 others. Those companies referred us to 5 more. We suddenly had more work than we could handle. David became the visible face of the company, charismatic at networking events, charming in client meetings, giving interviews to industry publications. He won an award for innovative marketing strategy. His photo appeared in business magazines. I stayed behind the scenes, handling operations, managing everything from accounting to client retention. I didn't mind at first because I believed in the team concept. But then, at a networking event, I overheard him talking to someone. "Oh, Rachel just handles paperwork," he said casually, dismissing years of strategic work with a single phrase. That comment lodged in my chest like a knife. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 15 minutes. When I came out, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the exhausted, invisible woman staring back. The cracks multiplied rapidly. David would interrupt me mid-sentence in client meetings to redirect conversations, using my ideas as springboards for his own elaboration while erasing my initial contribution. During important dinners, he'd flirt shamelessly with clients to secure deals, using charm instead of actual strategy. I'd confront him at home, and he'd respond by calling me too emotional or too sensitive. He started hiring without consulting me, particularly a bubbly blonde named Jessica who had no professional experience but possessed an energy David seemed obsessed with. He'd hired her as client relations manager, even though I'd mentioned we should hire someone qualified. "Not everything is about credentials, Rachel," he'd said coldly. "Sometimes it's about bringing light to the room. You used to do that." The implication was clear. I'd become dim. I'd become a burden. I'd become expendable. At an important client dinner, I watched David flirt with Jessica so aggressively that it became grotesque. He touched her arm repeatedly. He laughed too loudly at her jokes. He positioned his body next to hers while completely ignoring the actual client. I watched our business partner, a woman who'd trusted us, look disgusted. I tried to redirect the conversation back to work, back to the actual campaign we were supposedly discussing. David scolded me in front of everyone. "Rachel, why do you always have to ruin the mood? Why can't you just enjoy dinner like a normal person?" The clients looked at me with pity. I felt my dignity dissolve. That night, I went home and found Jessica signing emails as senior client relations lead. She'd been at the company for 3 months. I'd been building it for 3 years. I locked myself in the bathroom and screamed into a towel so David wouldn't hear. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like and subscribe. What happens next is absolutely devastating. I discovered the financial betrayal during what started as a normal payroll review. My name wasn't on payroll. I'd been working unpaid for 3 years. When I confronted David, he acted like I was being unreasonable. "You're my wife, not my employee."
"What's mine is ours," he said.
"Why would I pay you?" The logic seemed designed to trap me. If I was his wife, I had no employee protections. If I was his employee, I should have been paid. Either way, I had nothing. That same week, I found the credit card statements. Expensive dinners, hotel charges, jewelry purchases, things he'd never bought me. I recognized the dates and locations. He'd taken Jessica to that romantic restaurant he'd always promised to take me to for our anniversary. The hotel was the one we'd visited on our honeymoon. He was recreating our memories with someone else. I spiraled that night. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just sat in our bedroom holding his pillow, trying to understand where the man I'd married had gone. The next morning, I made a decision. I started systematically backing up every document to my personal cloud storage. Not for revenge, I wasn't even thinking clearly enough for that. I was protecting myself because I was finally, devastatingly understanding that I was vulnerable. I had no legal claim to the company. No financial security. No protection. I was completely exposed. As I was going through old files, I found a project proposal, one I'd led from conception to execution. My name had been removed and replaced with David Matthews as primary strategist. I scrolled through the document with shaking hands. He'd erased me, rewritten the entire history, made it as if I never existed. That night, I couldn't contain it anymore. Everything exploded. "You're erasing me," I screamed at David. "You're removing my name from projects I created. You're taking credit for my work while I sit here unpaid, like some kind of servant. You're cheating on me with Jessica. You're destroying me and you don't even seem to notice." David didn't apologize. He didn't even seem concerned. He just smirked and said the words that would haunt me. "You're replaceable, Rachel. You always were. I could hire 5 people to do what you do for half the salary." Something inside me died when he said that. Not just my heart. My entire understanding of our relationship shattered. The next morning, I found divorce papers on the kitchen counter. Not signed. Just waiting. He was giving me an ultimatum. Sign the papers and leave quietly, or he'd make things even worse. I packed a bag that afternoon. I left while he was at the office. I moved into a tiny studio apartment across town and kept going to work like a ghost. David pretended our marriage had never existed. He introduced me to clients as the operations manager, not his wife, not his partner, just a low-level employee. The humiliation deepened every single day. I'd finish a presentation and watch him take credit. I'd solve a client problem and watch him present the solution. I was becoming invisible in real time. But I kept documenting everything, Every client I'd brought in, every campaign I'd created, every problem I'd solved. I was finishing a major client transition when I received an email titled Performance Review, Attitude Concerns. David had written that my energy levels and facial expressions were affecting client relationships. He was building a paper trail. He was setting me up for something. One morning, David called me into a meeting with 3 major clients. My chest tightened immediately. This was it. In front of all of them, he criticized my demeanor, my lack of enthusiasm, my negative presence. Then he dropped the bomb. "Rachel, I've decided we're letting you go. You're not suited for client-facing work. I need people who bring positive energy to every interaction." He fired me for not smiling enough. In that moment, I felt my entire world fracture. The clients looked absolutely horrified. One of them, James, stood up. "David, this is inappropriate. Rachel has been the backbone of every campaign we've worked on." David waved him off. "She's just been following orders." I stood up without saying anything. I gathered my notebook and looked at each client directly in the eye. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. As I walked out, James grabbed my arm gently. "Call me," he whispered. "Please call me." I spiraled for an entire week. I sold my wedding ring to a pawn shop for $800. I moved into an even smaller apartment in a bad neighborhood. I didn't shower for days. I barely ate. I played our song on repeat and cried until my eyes swelled completely shut. I called my mother and told her everything, that David had been cheating, that he'd erased me from the company, that he'd fired me for not smiling. She wanted to come get me, but I couldn't face her disappointment. She'd warned me about David. I'd ignored her. Then one morning, I woke up and looked at my old notebook. Every idea inside it was worth money. Every campaign was brilliant. Every strategy had generated millions. David hadn't made me. I'd made him. And I could do it again without him. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was James. "Rachel, I need to talk to you," James said without preamble. "I know what David did. I know he fired you. And I'm pulling my company's account from his firm effective immediately." My heart stopped. His company's account was worth $2 million annually. "I want to hire you directly," James continued, "as an independent consultant. Full rate, full benefits, everything." I cried while he was talking. Not sad tears, tears of relief. He explained that he'd been watching my work for years. He knew where the brilliance came from.
He knew it was me, not David.
Within 48 hours, I had a consulting contract worth $50,000 per month. Enough to survive. Enough to start building something new. I didn't pitch myself hard or negotiate aggressively. I just showed him my work. That was enough. My comeback had begun, and David had no idea it was coming. David sent me a legal notice accusing me of violating confidentiality agreements. I forwarded it to a lawyer, terrified. But the lawyer called me back laughing. "You never signed a non-compete," she said. "He never made you sign anything. He was too confident, too arrogant. You own the intellectual property of everything you created." She sent David's lawyer a response that essentially said, "Stop harassing our client or we're filing for harassment." David called me screaming, "You can't do this. That work is mine. You're stealing from me." I calmly replied, "No, David. I'm taking what was always mine." Then I hung up and blocked his number. An industry blog published an internal video of David berating staff members. "You're all replaceable," he'd screamed at them during a team meeting. "I could replace every single one of you tomorrow." The video went viral. Clients started calling, asking questions. Investors began pulling funding. David's firm started bleeding money and talent. Employees resigned en masse. I didn't celebrate publicly. I just kept working. I kept delivering excellent work for James. Within 1 week, I had 3 more clients pulling their accounts from David's firm and hiring me directly. Each client told me the same thing. David had failed spectacularly once I was gone. His charm meant nothing without actual strategy behind it. One of David's former interns, a young woman named Sophie that I'd mentored personally, reached out to me. She told me she was quitting because of David's verbal abuse. He'd promised her a promotion, then given it to Jessica. He'd yelled at her for minor mistakes. He'd made her feel worthless. Sophie was considering leaking everything to the press. Instead of encouraging revenge, I did something that surprised both of us. I helped her refine her resume. I connected her with industry contacts. I gave her confidence that she wasn't worthless. David was just cruel. Sophie leaked her story anyway, but not out of revenge. She did it because the truth mattered. She did it because other people needed to know. The article published in a major business magazine. It documented David's toxic work environment. It included allegations from 5 former employees: Sophie, the intern he'd yelled at, a designer he'd sexually harassed, an accountant he'd overworked, and an assistant he'd fired without cause. David's name was attached to every story. His firm's reputation imploded overnight. 2 board members resigned. 3 investors demanded their money back. The office became a wasteland: empty desks, silent phones, abandoned projects. David showed up one day to find half the staff gone. Meanwhile, Rachel's consultancy was thriving. She had 5 major clients. She was being praised for her ethics and warmth, the exact qualities David had tried to destroy her for. A board member from David's original firm called me desperately. "Rachel, we need help," he said. "The company is falling apart. We're hemorrhaging clients. We're losing money. Can you come in as a consultant to stabilize us?" I listened to his entire pitch. Then I said something that defined my character. You can't rebuild trust with the same leadership that broke it. David needs to step down completely, or nothing changes. Not his title, not his authority. Complete removal. The board member was silent. Then he said, "What if we remove him?" I paused and answered honestly, "Then you might have a chance. But I won't work with him in any capacity." The board member promised to talk to the other board members. 2 days later, David was removed as CEO. I launched my own firm 3 weeks after being fired. I called it Authentic Communications and Strategy. My first 3 hires were women David had overlooked or actively suppressed, brilliant women with talents he'd deliberately buried. We rented a small office with exposed brick and natural light. We made it beautiful because we deserved beauty. Within 3 months, we'd acquired 10 major clients. 5 of them were from David's former company. The firm that David had built with my work was now effectively working for my company. He'd become completely irrelevant. David's office became increasingly empty. No clients calling. No energy. Just him, sitting alone with the weight of his destroyed career. He tried calling me constantly. I let every call ring out unanswered. He sent emails begging me to meet with him. I didn't respond. He showed up at my favorite cafe one day, looking bloated and broken. "Rachel, please," he said desperately. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake.
Can we talk?"
I looked at him calmly and said, "There's nothing to talk about." I walked out and never looked back. That night, he sent a text. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please help me." I deleted it without responding. He'd become someone I didn't know anymore. More than that, he'd become someone I didn't want to know. Exactly 3 weeks after being fired, my firm officially took over every major client from David's company. His firm was worth nothing now. All value had drained away. He called me one final time. "Can we meet?" he asked, his voice small and defeated. I agreed because I wanted to see him face what he'd done. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd first met as business partners. He looked destroyed, unshaven, bloated, wearing the same clothes he'd worn the day before. He started apologizing frantically, rambling about mistakes, about missing me, about being stupid. I listened calmly. Then I slid a business card across the table. "We're hiring," I said. "Entry-level positions. Starting salary is $40,000 annually. You'd report to Sophie, the intern you treated terribly." His face crumpled. "Rachel, I can't." I stood up. "That's the offer. Or nothing. Your choice." I walked out while he sat there trembling. Rachel attended an industry awards gala 3 months after being fired. She was nominated for Ethical Leader of the Year, recognition for rebuilding her career with integrity instead of revenge. David was also there, looking like a ghost in the corner. When they called her name, Rachel walked to the stage and looked out at the audience. She saw Sophie, the intern. She saw James, her first client.
She saw her team.
She said into the microphone, "Never let anyone tell you that being kind makes you weak. Integrity isn't weakness. It's the strongest foundation you can build on. Never smile when you don't mean it. Never pretend to be smaller than you are. Because the people who matter will see you. They always see you. The ones who don't see you aren't worth being seen by." The crowd erupted. As she was accepting her award, David walked out in shame. 1 month after the award ceremony, David reached out one final time. He was homeless. Actually homeless. He'd lost his apartment. He'd exhausted his savings. He had nowhere to go. He called me crying, begging for help. I met him at a diner. He looked like a different person, not just physically broken, but spiritually hollow. He confessed everything. "I was threatened by you," he admitted. "You were smarter than me. You were better than me. So I tried to make you smaller. I tried to break you. I was terrified that if people knew the truth, they wouldn't need me. I listened without feeling satisfaction, without feeling revenge. I just felt sad. David, you destroyed yourself," I said. "I didn't do this. You did." He asked if he could work in my firm.
I said no.
But I did give him the number of a therapist. I told him he needed to understand why he'd become this way. He needed help I couldn't provide. Rachel's firm continued growing exponentially. She was invited to speak at business conferences. She mentored dozens of young professionals, particularly women who'd experienced workplace abuse. When a young woman asked how she stayed strong, Rachel answered, "By remembering that integrity is the one thing no one can ever fire you for. Your character, your work ethic, your kindness, these things are yours. No one can take them." That girl went on to start her own successful firm. Rachel's influence was multiplying. She was changing the industry one person at a time. 6 months after being fired, Rachel's firm surpassed David's former company's annual revenue by 300%. She walked past the building one day and saw a bankruptcy notice on the door. The company was officially dissolved. The dream David had claimed as his own had ceased to exist. But Rachel's dream was thriving beyond anything she'd imagined. She'd built something better, something based on respect, transparency, genuine care, and actual excellence. Everything David's company had never been. Rachel stood outside the old office building 1 year after being fired. The space was completely empty now. She pulled out her old notebook, the one with every idea she'd ever created. She touched the worn cover and whispered, 3 weeks. That's all it took for truth to catch up. She smiled, a real smile, not one forced for a client or a boss. This smile was just for her. She turned and walked toward her car, her reflection visible in the glass door. Peaceful.
Free.
Undeniably radiant. She'd replaced him without ever trying to destroy him. She'd simply become undeniably excellent, and that was more powerful than any revenge could ever be. As she drove away from that building for the last time, she knew she would never think about him again. She had too much living to do.